It's time for your next favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene.
Welcome back to the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene. It's Wednesday morning, technically. Jolene's ruining my office.
Your Ogopogo fell.
My Ogopogo fell over.
That reminds me, my daughter brought home a book. So she's 8 and she brought home a book for, good morning, everybody. And it was library day and she's like, here, Mom. And oh my God, she brought like this like haunted stories of BC.
Ooh.
Like my kids couldn't sleep the one night we were reading the books. But yeah, there is... In this Victoria Lake, there is like this man creature with scales and stuff, and he came out and like kicked the shit out of 2 guys back in 1979 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember that one?
I remember that. I had that book somewhere when I was a kid, yeah.
Anyway, so then it made me tell them about Ogopogo and stuff, and like we actually had an Ogopogo book, and my kids kind of remembered, but they were like, are these things real? Which actually kind of goes in line with what we're going to talk about today. Oh, genius.
There you go.
Sorry, Ogopogo.
Yeah, he's okay. We're going to be talking about 2 things. Well, they're kind of the same thing. Belief and truth/facts. Mm-hmm. And are there any real truths to life? Or is everything just enough collective belief that enough people believe them to think that they're true?
So that they become valid on the table of
conversation, things, topics. But because like you got to think like Western culture has what they believe like a number of truths to it. But if you go over to India or China, they have different things that kind of clash with what we think is true. Mm-hmm. So are these all then just beliefs?
Or fake news.
There's a lot of that going on these days. Like what you were mentioning before, how was it CTV fired their fact checker?
Yeah.
So they're not fired, but just got rid of the fact checker.
I want to say her name's Rachel Gilmore. I don't know. I don't follow that. But I saw one of my friends wrote like this public social media letter to CTV really like kicking back against that and like really stopping their support of that channel because they got rid of the fact checker segment on the news.
Which like...
makes no sense right now. And it was the same day the tariffs were all announced. And, and
it was also, I think it was the Conservative Party that pushed to get rid of that. That Pierre Poulivari wanted that gone.
I don't
you know what follow. I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, interesting. Okay.
And news, having worked in news, like you need to check your facts. And even then, though, the facts literally were what the interviewee said.
Yeah.
And then what the other interviewee said and what information that could be put together. They're not saying that what they said was true, but it was just making sure that everything that we were told lined up. So that when the story came out the next day, they couldn't come back and say, well, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So even then, it's not like truth or facts. Yeah, it's just the information provided.
Yeah. And in counseling, we do that through paraphrasing and different sort of techniques where we take the person's story and we double check that we understood what they were trying to tell us. Yeah. So we might summarize. Everyone who's got these clinical skills, it's called summarization or paraphrasing, right? And essentially, you're pretty much collecting all of the little items that they told you and you're reflecting them back to them so they can say, yeah, exactly, and feel validated and confirm that, or say, well, no, kind of what I meant was blah, blah, blah. So that you're always double checking. You're always fact checking, essentially, because often what comes out of our mouth might not always the first time be truly what we meant. Some people are outside thinkers before they're inside thinkers, right? So that is something we do on a regular basis around fact checking, right? You'll hear Jason and I do that on here sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Where we'll kind of reflect back to the other person and be like, well, yeah, sort of. Or, I remember when Claire did that in her episode. She was like, yes, that one word, brave, right? And she gave a definition of like why that isn't something that she truly identified with on her journey and what that, like the semantics of that word meant, right? Yeah. So all those kinds of things. And it's really just for us to get deeper understanding and deeper meaning, which we'll talk about more next week.
That's right, because we're working on that because all these things kind of come together.
Yeah.
And even like when you think about counseling, is you are taking in the information of your client and you have to take what they're telling you as fact, but they're only providing their perspective on things, right? Especially when it comes, I'm sure if you're doing like talking to someone about their relationship, but the other partner's not in there with them, right? Because it's not like a couple's counseling. You're basing what you can say on what you're being told.
Yeah, I do that a lot. So I actually work with a lot of family members, partners, people who I know, a few of them in the story, right? And what I tell them all flat out, like, I I've done some cool family sessions to demonstrate this. So I don't really look at it as fact. I look at it as their truth. What's true to them is going to be different to what is true to the other person. So my way of demonstrating this is I actually have the family sit in a circle-like position in my office, and I put my mug down because it's probably the closest thing to me. And I say, everybody draw a picture of that. And sometimes I actually make them draw the picture. And sometimes I just say, like, imagine in your head what your version of the picture would look like. So I actually find where the handle is, and I go to the person across from that, because technically they can't see the handle. It's hidden behind the mug. So their picture of a mug is going to have no handle. The other people are going to have a very distinct handle. If there's only a picture on one side of the mug than the other person across from them doesn't see what that picture is. So you're going to get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different pictures of this mug, but it is the exact same mug.
Yeah.
Is any one of those pictures wrong?
No.
And that is what happens when we look at family stories. You can have the death of one person, and every single person has a different picture of that death. The way it impacted them, how they faced it, how it faced them, like what their relationship was in it. And they're all sitting there arguing about whether there's a handle or not, right?
Yeah,
Instead
for sure.
of saying mine didn't have a handle, but yours did. And boom, we integrate all of it. Now we don't have our own lived experience with the handle, but we have an awareness that there is a handle.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Well, it does. It's the same when you interview witnesses to a crime or an accident. You could talk to 2 or 3 different people. You get 2 or 3 different versions of the event. Similar, but not exactly the same. So the truth is always somewhere in that middle area, right?
Yes.
And so that's where I think this is something that's not quite discussed enough when it comes to experiences.
Yeah, because 2 things, one of 2 can happen. You can have that really like healthy version of like, I don't have the experience with the handle or the image, but I understand it's there. Or you can get the one that takes less work and is more automatic, and there's no fucking handle. There's no picture. And the argument of experiences begins.
And that's what we see a lot in the world nowadays, especially on social media, which is why it's become prevalent. And that is actually spilling over into the rest of the world. People now, our society seems to have lost its ability to see things from other people's perspectives. In fact, I think even the data is starting to show that people are kind of losing their ability to interact with each other socially in a polite manner. Not everyone, this is a generalization, but it's becoming more and more common.
Yeah, I feel like we can go through this when we force people to take polar opposite sides of the scale, which we've noticed down south. You're either right or left, and there's no in between. And I think when we've been in places societally, personally, where we make space for many truths, I believe this maybe spiritual belief system or religious belief system. And I also know a good portion of people believe in this one. And a good portion of people believe in this, and a good portion of people don't believe any of those, right? And we can all show up at the same soccer game. We can all show up in the same classroom. We can all, you know, those are pieces I think we can waffle between societally. And when we create that like really polar opposite experience, we're essentially weakening people, and we're shortening their window of tolerance for things. And when I look at window of tolerance from a counseling perspective, it's like, how much distress can you tolerate, and how much can you stay grounded and rational through maybe some intense situations, right? That would be from like a nervous system perspective of an experience. But essentially that's what happens when you have, 10, 12, 15 different belief systems thrown in front of you, right?
Yes.
It's no different than that when we look at it from like that philosophical kind of larger standpoint. And I think we lose people's capacity when we are stuck at right or left or right or wrong or whatever.
And there's a lot of right or wrong now, because people are not willing to accept someone else's point of view if it's different, because you got to, for some reason, it's almost like you're trying to justify your belief system by putting someone else's down. And my dad would always say to me, if you believe something, that's fine. Don't let no one else can change your mind. And nor should you go around changing someone else's mind because they disagree with you. Just listen to their point of view. Maybe it'll open your perspective up or make you more willing to accept different things. But we don't seem to be doing that anymore.
But we do it when we believe that power is being abused or
Yes.
different things. So I think in 2020, this was highlighted. We had this very different opinion of right and wrong
Yep.
or, what people should do or shouldn't do. And I think when people backlashed, there was a larger sense of something isn't right. This is unjust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the majority of people that looked like assholes and were in this, I'm going to say it, like the anti-vaxxer kind of scenario, when you actually broke down what that overt behavior looked like, many of these people were actually offended that human rights were being violated. And that's what the core of it was. It wasn't about an oppression to government, whatever, or whether the treatment was right or wrong. It was the fact that it was mandated and that universally infringed on people's human rights that back up the truck veterans fought for.
Yeah.
And my veterans taught me this the most because they were like, I fought for the freedom of this country, and this act or whatever movement completely violates that, which was so conflicting for them.
Oh, for sure, right?
The government that they fought for to create that for the people just essentially stabbed them in the back and did exactly that and took away their freedom.
Yeah.
Right. So when you can actually look at, okay, what is the behavior we're seeing on the outside, but where is it sourced? What is the core, like, fundamental value that's fueling it? That's where, when we start to try and throw our opinions at people, I wonder if there's a deeper value sense under there.
I think so. I think you've hit that on the head. And I think if you know what your values are, I think you're able to have that more intelligent conversation and more accepting of something that's different. Mm-hmm. When you don't, that's when that defensiveness kicks in, because you're not really sure what, you just know you're pissed off, but you don't know why.
Yeah.
And so you're just going to argue it.
Yep. Totally.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And this also is then where, like, where do our, like, automatic behaviors and our triggers come in, right? So how much of that is, I don't feel heard. I never felt heard. Nobody respected me. I didn't feel important and significant. And now is my time. I'm going to, like, act out against that and try and be heard and try and be validated and try,
Yeah.
So really sourcing, like, when we feel like a dog with a bone, is it coming from a trauma place and a negative pattern from the past, or is it coming from an inspired place? Like, is this, you can't drop this because there is a true innate kind of like internal drive to pursue it.
Yeah.
I
agree.
Yeah. I had quite a few conversations about that this week in my office, actually, and those exact issues were coming up for people. And then it's also neat when you look at, kind of go back to, like, what's true for one person is also true for the other. Like, there was this young man I was working with, and there was this altercation between him and a friend. It was more of a miscommunication, really. And I mean, this is where text messaging gets a little messed up and some things like that or whatever. I think they were gaming. And remember, this happened during Mercury retrograde, so it's to be expected. But it was funny because he said, like, yeah, we were playing this game, and I was just like, no, do it this way and this and this and this. And then I didn't understand. He wasn't listening. And then we got frustrated, and then he kind of lashed out at me, and he's like, I wanted him to, like, help make the next level. I didn't understand why, like, he didn't want to make the next level. And he was well-intended, but he looked like a dick while he was doing it. Right. And that's also kind of like, he's a bit of a snapcase that way with some of his friends. So I said to him, well, isn't this cool? So let's pretend that your friend also has something. I said, what I know about you is that you have given me many examples that at home, when you've seen your dad doing something stupid, you as now like a 22-year-old man who's, you had like 6 years working in that field. You're like, oh, Dad, this is a better way to do it. And your dad, who works in a different field, thinks, oh, yeah, no, I'm not listening to my son. Mm-hmm. And then you watched him screw up the job. And that's frustrating for you because your dad won't give you the credibility, listen to you. And you actually knew what to do there, right? And he was like, yeah. And I said, so this is your repeated belief. I know the right way to do this, and you're not listening to me. And now I have to watch you fuck up when I had the answer.
Yep. And I gave it to you.
So that's my client's perspective. That's his true experience.
Yep.
What if his friend is the guy who's been micromanaged by his parents, never left to figure things out on his own, always told what to do? He's going to resist that telling him what to do because he's like, just let me figure it out.
Yeah. Oh, big time. That's exactly what would be going on there.
My client was like, oh. And I said, so both of you literally went face to face with your biggest wounds. And he probably felt like you were controlling him like maybe his parents have.
Yeah.
Right?
And you felt like he wasn't listening to you
treating you
and
like
going to fuck
dad.
up, right?
Yeah. And I said, that is a brilliant example of what happens in our life on a daily basis. It's so crazy.
It is. And yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
And what we need to do is like in those moments, and he said, we ended up repairing after and we were like, yeah, sorry about that. I should have gone easier, this and this. And I said, where you can take that one step deeper is then making that extra connection. You know what? I think I was extra pissed off because like when I try and suggest things to my dad, he never listens to me and that's what it felt like. And then that guy might go, oh yeah, you know what? You made me feel like my mom does in that moment.
Yeah.
You take that connection one step further, boom, that unlocks so much for people and retrains what that pattern's going to be next time.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah. Yeah, it was cool. I love moments like that in my office. It's fun.
The eureka moment.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So when we look at facts, when we look at truth, when we look at the truth.
Well, and I can't remember who it was that coined the phrase capital T truth.
Oh, okay.
That's like the irrefutable. That's something that we know is true, universally agreed upon, which he said there's like pretty much none, except we die.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but and maybe love, but love is also very easily manipulated by belief and, meaning and all this kind of stuff. So there's very few capital T truths out there. Facts, like, think about it in terms of what we know as fact. Like people will say like, well, it's a fact that smoking gives you cancer and you die. But how many people have been pack-a-day smokers their entire life and don't get cancer and don't die from it? They die from old age.
Yeah. And I think this is where we have like correlation and causation. I think we collect enough evidence of something that there becomes more and more and more essentially evidence in that file around some of those things. But yeah, it's really interesting. It makes me question how much power, as to say, power and money. What does power and money have to do with truth and facts? Right?
Oh,
like
I
there could be something, even in any kind of advances of something, whether it's the construction world, whether it's this or that, if you don't have money to back up essentially research or production of said item, to bring it to the awareness of the masses, to then make it a credible, acknowledged thing, then something that could be sitting there as a really viable truth or fact pretty much goes dormant forever. So do you need power? Do you need perhaps money to bring something into its factualization?
I would say yes. When you look at history, what is it? Whoever is the victor writes the history book. It doesn't mean that what they're telling you is 100% accurate. It just means that they're the ones that won the war, so they're going to write the history book. Right? So even that's a very malleable thing.
Yeah. Right? You're only ever getting the perspective of the ones that survived.
Exactly it.
So, that's just kind
cure
of
cure for cancer, right? Cure for cancer. Is there one? There probably is.
In somebody's head somewhere, there probably is.
It just hasn't been.
They're not seen as credible. They don't have the right connections, right?
And then trying to argue with Big Pharma, who makes a shit ton of money off of the treatment of cancer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So really looking at some of that stuff. And then this is also where, things that are maybe detrimental are given a lot of power and authority and publicity or whatever it be to acknowledge and back it. And then the masses ride on. And this is where, we've talked about in previous episodes, connection with self. The more self-assured somebody is and the more in connection they are with themselves, I think the more we're able to view something with clarity and go, yeah, I know I have a handle on my side of the mug. So this person's committed to a mug with no handle, and that's fine. But I'm never going to second guess what I know. I'm not going to second guess my knowing. I know that there is a handle because I see it. And I think more and more of us are starting to get to this place through our healing, through this very selective discernment. I think discernment is a big piece in our truth fact finding on our own. And that's going to be something that, came out of 2020 for sure, was our ability to step back. How we distract people away from that is disempower them. We distract them. We create chaos. We create this polarity of right and wrong instead of an entire spectrum. Like, I remember learning about politics, and there were 4 checkpoints on the political spectrum.
Yeah.
You know? And there was an entire continuum, and you would place where kind of each party was each year, whatever that looked like. Now there's a right or there's a left.
Yeah. Or there's a right and we're right and they're wrong.
Yeah.
And there's no meeting in the middle.
There's a right or a wrong, a different version of right.
In the Canadian system, now it's become that way too. There's a right and a wrong. But back like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was the opposition was called the loyal opposition. So all the opposition did was just kind of, they were like the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't be there always trying to topple the government. They were just like a check and a balance. But now even in Canada, it's become the polar opposites, and the one side's always right and one side's always wrong.
And I think when we look at history and we look at the way the world works, the way biology works, I think we need both ends of the spectrum. I remember looking at this in terms of like power and control, societally and stuff, and you do need somebody to be in charge, right? When there is no charge, no order, I think it would take a long time for that to create its own sense of something. And I do think that as a human species, or even organisms, or even just basic cycle of life animal chain, we need a hierarchy. I actually do kind of think that to a certain degree. And it's just about how much and who gets that hierarchy. But I wonder, right, when you look at anything in this world, maybe that version of the push and pull is what actually creates all of us to put the substance into things. Like if we didn't have gravity right now, none of this,
floating.
like you guys wouldn't even be hearing us because we wouldn't be beside this microphone and there would be no order. We wouldn't be able to actually accomplish anything. So maybe having polarities forces us into places of accomplishment, finding truth. I don't know. It makes me so curious what the benefit of all of that is, right? As well as the destruction of things, right?
Well, I think, if there was if society crumbled because of a plague or a planet-smashing meteorite or anything like that, everyone would go off. There'd be some floundering, but then they'd come together in groups. And then invariably, out of those groups, someone would take charge.
Yeah.
Either by force or by agreement or
like
by
Survivor
whatever.
or something.
Like Survivor, or I always think of like the Road Warrior, like, the Lord Humongous of the Wasteland was in charge of all these people out in the wasteland. But I mean, that just naturally happens. And then they create their own rules and belief systems based on that, and laws.
Just a bunch of renegades.
Just a bunch of renegades. But that's what would happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's naturally how we're wired to operate.
We will naturally find a hierarchy of order.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Just like the ecosystem does. It truly does, right?
Yep.
And then how that fuels back into, literally through animal shit, replanting seeds of growth for the forest floor, right?
And that's where beliefs come from.
Totally.
Right?
So really looking at all those things, and then we can peel that back, and we've talked a lot about political influence on beliefs because that is a huge part. I remember when I first went into social work intro courses, and I was like, oh, there was this one course. It was always after Buck a Beer Max night. It was on Thursday mornings, you guys, and sometimes I showed up in the same clothes I had on the day before. And I remember thinking oh my God, if I could just get through this politics course, the rest of my program will be a breeze. And then I realized how much of this career was politics based, whether it was funding and influence, all the things that impact people's lives. And I remember being so disappointed. I really have to understand this shit. But, it's interesting. It strongly influences us. Prior to that, I don't think we heard as much about politics as we did a religion, because I actually think politics was ruled by religion. Well, initially, yeah. King and the king and church, God was always a big part of the church system, the monarchy, right? And you go ask him. I remember I think it was one of my history classes, they were doing dramatic reenactments of how things would work. And it'd be like, some guy would come up and we've got to go attack the Saxons over the hill over there. And it's like, let me consult with the priest. Priest, what do you think? Oh, I think God thinks this is a good idea. You know what I mean? But it was funny, but it was like, that's literally what would happen. Yeah. So recognizing what is the history of this? Yeah. It was a religious belief system that I think societally in some areas of the world, not all, because Europe is still very, forward, religion based. And down south, it's God first, family second. So looking at some of that influence, and then when we look at parts of the world that have separated from that belief system but hold political value, what takes the place of that? Because there is a core underpinning of something, right?
There is.
That has to take the value belief system that starts to guide decisions, and that becomes like the sort of objectives and beliefs of the political party sort of thing. But really looking back to what was the basis of religion? Well, it was about human behavior, the reasons why things happened, consequences to things, right? Like,
Oh, it was, and then rules for governing yourself as a decent human being.
rules for governing yourself as a decent human being. Yes.
According to
Yeah,
this.
and that is what our political parties tried to do as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wild. But also looking at our lack of trust. So I think trust in truth and trust in facts and all of these things really toy with us too, right?
Well, especially now, because it's greater than ever, especially amongst Generation Z, there's a distrust of government and of government bodies.
Yeah, but
They
we
just
also
don't.
have a huge distrust in ourselves, right?
Yeah.
If I don't have a strong sense of self and I look at that mug and the person across from me is my authority figure, my mom or my dad or somebody that I really look up to, and they're like they show me their picture of their mug and there's no fucking handle on it. What if I sit there quietly doubting my perspective, doubting, like not trusting my perspective, and I erase the handle on mine? I'm not sure. Mine's not the same as yours.
Yeah.
We have so much of this conforming. And I think more ignorant conforming, and I don't mean that in a bad way, it's just a lack of knowledge, ignorance. More ignorant conforming is actually due to a lack of trust in self.
For sure. And that, I think, is what we saw happen down in the South,
Yes.
in the States with the last election.
Yes.
I mean, he tapped
in
into a group
2020.
of, and in 2020,
Yeah.
he tapped into a group of people that weren't as self-aware and felt very disenfranchised by the previous government. And so he tapped into that.
Totally.
Took advantage of it, right?
And there might even be, this happens in our podcast, you guys. You guys, if you place us in a place of knowing your authority, or, you ultimately feel like what we present is mostly factual. And we're pretty open about like where our facts come from. I'll tell you guys when I have a theory of something, I'm like, I got no research on this, but this is what my brain comes up with and it makes sense to me, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Then you will take that and probably acquire that. There's so many of you that do acquire that, share that with your masses, and that is how information now gets dispersed.
Yep. There's an algorithm that will take that and just feed you the stuff that you're looking for.
And then you will wear that. You will put that on as a new piece of information that guides your behavior moving forward, right? Like this is happening all the time around us,
Yeah.
And it's about like, I guess what we're exposed to now that we weren't before. We weren't given so many options. We weren't able to just search something or AI something or Google something to be like, what is the best way to get enough protein? And all of a sudden you're like, poof, there's like a million biohacking options out there.
Oh, huge.
Right? Like my parents didn't have that option. They were like, does the label at the store say?
Yep.
Right.
And we eat roast on Sunday.
Yeah, it was
and
like
that's
meat,
just what you
potatoes,
did. Yeah.
veggies. This is what you did. There was no macro counting. There was no nothing, right?
And that's a whole other conversation because back in the day when you were working on a farm, you just needed calories.
Yeah.
Calories,
Yeah.
which
So
we don't know.
Now, so much of what we know to be true is based on what's available to us.
Yep.
Yeah. And back then, it was still based on what was available to us, but there was a much more limited availability.
Yeah. So now it's like you got to ask yourself, okay, this is being presented as fact according to whom?
Yeah.
Right?
Perfect example. Like, how does this play out in daily life? Because I know some of this seems really like macro for you guys, but like this morning, my one daughter, she loves to wear the perfect outfit. Well, the perfect outfit differs every day. Okay. So she's got 5, 6, 7 different items on the floor this morning. And then she finally picks a shirt, but there's 3, 4 more shirts on the floor. She's not one of my kids who puts that back in the drawer. I'm making it sound like any of them do, and they don't. But she doesn't do it more obviously. So I finally just looked at her as I was standing there because she's always getting me to tell her, well, which one do you like? I said, well, I like that one. She's like, but you said that about the other one. I said, because I did like the other one, but they were 2 totally different outfits. And she doesn't understand how I can like both of them. One of them has to be better than the other. And I was
Yes.
like, I got nothing for you, girl. I like both of them for different
You
reasons.
pick the one that you liked most.
I keep trying to teach her this,
Yeah.
and she really wants me to tell her. So then when I tell her which one, she picks the opposite. It is the biggest trip. Okay?
That's the age she's at too, I'm sure.
What I learned from this one child, there's a lot of these moments, right? And
Yep.
these are also big trigger moments for me too, because they use time, and that is a form of control in a sense,
Yeah.
right? So it was interesting. At one point I found myself saying, you need to put the rest of these clothes away, because you've made your decision, but you're looking at all these clothes on the floor and your brain thinks you still need to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Put them away. You have too many choices. And this is part of that like minimalist episode.
Oh,
when
for
we
sure.
have too many options, yes, we can be, you can never be educated enough, but maybe we get more diluted in our certainty of what something is, right?
Exactly.
There's a difference between a 4-question multiple choice and an 8-question multiple choice.
Or the paragraph you've got to write based on your knowledge of.
The bigger, and that one's okay because there's no right or wrong.
No, as
There's
long as you
an
got to hit some
overall-
points, right? Yeah.
I loved writing papers as opposed to multiple choice
Me too,
because
me
that
too.
was my jam. But the difference between, I've got 4 and I feel pretty good about C, as opposed to 8, oh shit, there's 3 that it could be.
Mm-hmm.
The more options, the more self-doubt. And actually apply that in different places, right? Like, yeah, where do you feel like you have too many options and that increases your self-doubt?
It was funny. We got, this ties into belief a bit. My tenant, Ollie, and I got into a conversation the other night about flat earthers. Because to me, it's obvious to me that they're quacks. No offense to any flat earthers out there. But he brought up some good points. Well, they talk about this and this, and have you noticed this? And I said, yeah, but Ollie, when they present the diagram of the earth and they've got the 2 paddle wheels on either end, moving the water so the water system goes back up, and that's why the oceans don't go away, they lost me. Because no, like, that's impossible. Like, and they believe this.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
like,
and there's enough of them that believe it that it became put on the board
yeah.
as a viable option to argue about.
yeah.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. The other thing I think is really cool is that you guys are able to have that because both of you go out and fact check the paranormal all the time.
All the time. And we're very open-minded human beings, but we
Yes.
also we're kind of grounded at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you need that. So what is the point of this conversation?
Right? I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
That is the point, folks. That is the point. And that is why we are in, I love the human business because I can see patterns, I can see themes, but everybody's going to get there on their own road.
Yeah.
It is so cool to see how many people get there in their own way, right?
And I think, and this is sort of just what I believe, because you can't go and tell someone else that they're wrong if they believe it strongly enough, right? So just be comfortable enough in what you believe to not enforce your belief system on somebody else.
Mm-hmm. And ask yourself, what is the benefit to them for keeping this belief system?
Yes,
right?
if they're not hurting anybody or themselves, so what?
And usually it's because it aligns with however they're living their life or whatever might be blocking their life. Like if someone isn't making change and they're believing it's because of a certain thing, then maybe that's helping them stay where they are in that moment because they're not ready to do something else or whatever that be. So usually, there is something underneath all of that. Like if someone's really pushing their opinion on you, what is the belief? What is the issue there? Do they feel like something is unjust and they want to enable people to make different decisions or feel like they have the power to have a different opinion? Or are they, feeling unheard? Are they feeling violated against and they're angry and attacking and think everyone should agree? Or what are those things, right?
Yeah, no,
Yep.
100%.
Yep. So really helping to get past what's coming out on the surface, get to the bottom of that iceberg.
And then you'll just find maybe a little bit of peace.
Yeah.
Or a place to agree from.
Yeah. Or fake news.
Fake news. Anyways, we're going to be kind of continuing this conversation next week as we get into meaning.
Yeah. I can't even imagine what AI is going to do to this truth world, right?
Oh.
Because that's all influenced by who knows. You could influence a whole bunch of AI data on false data.
Oh, you can. And did you know that to feed their AI computers, they took a whole bunch of books but never bought the rights to those books?
Oh.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So a bunch of people, their information is just being shared for free that they spend all this time writing and researching.
Yeah. Wow.
Wrong. Anyways, until next week, I'm Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Just believe.